Hello, and welcome to another NABBW Financial Podcast. Tonight, I'm with regular guest Pam Sams to discuss our very important February topic, Suddenly Single, the importance of financial planning for women. Tonight's topic is an essential one, especially for us boomer women. Personally, I've experienced what it's like to suddenly become single 40 years ago when my first husband and I divorced. But sadly, my sister also joined this club 2 years ago when her husband of 46 years died shortly after they finished brunch on New Year's Day. She had no clue there was any problem. He merely said he was going to go lie down because he wasn't feeling well. When she went in to check on him about half an hour later, she found him on the floor of their bedroom. He hadn't even made it to the bed, dead of an undiagnosed heart problem. We boomer women might not like to think about unexpectedly becoming uncoupled, but I'm sure Pam will agree with me when I say that death and divorce rank among the top 5 financial challenges we women face. Estate planning, investment decisions, and legacy planning are the other big hurdles. An article from CNBC published about a year ago reported that nearly 80% of women will at some time become their household's sole financial decision maker. What's more, many will then spend several decades controlling their own finances. The U.S. Census Bureau reports that half of all U.S. women who become widowed are under the age of 59. At the same time, our current average life expectancy is 79. It's simple math to realize that we're talking about widowhood potentially lasting at least 2 decades. Now, we know that some women enjoy managing their own finances, but for others, they find it easier to work with an advisor. If you decide to seek guidance on key issues like estate planning, tax planning, long-term financial planning, and investing, it's crucial to work with a financial advisor who understands your unique needs and goals. As well, you should seek out someone who is a fiduciary obligated by law to manage your assets while acting in your best financial interest, as opposed, for example, to someone who works on a commission basis. Though traditional gender roles are slowly changing, I'm sure Pam is going to be telling us that many couples still adhere to them, with men taking the lead on finances. In fact, a recent study conducted by UBS, the world's largest global wealth management organization, found that while 85% of us women are comfortable managing our everyday expenses, only 23% of us feel knowledgeable enough to take out on our own long-term financial planning. Becoming suddenly single can set your world in a tailspin, and if you haven't done any planning for this sort of future, you'll find yourself feeling even further behind at a time when your emotions are probably both fragile and frazzled, and it's hard to think pragmatically. Worse, we boomer women were raised that it's not polite to discuss money or investing in social situations. And as we've discussed here in the past, when Pam suggested that we adopt her plan for periodic financial date nights with our spouse or significant other, our finances are still something we don't discuss often enough. So Pam, I'm so glad that you suggested tonight's topic and are bringing us your list of 10 important items to consider as part of our Suddenly Single discussion, and I thank you for that. As usual, now that I've gotten our topic teed up, I need to properly introduce this call before we can dive into Pam's checklist. So, hello, I'm Ann Holmes, your moderator and the Boomer-in-Chief of the National Association of Baby Boomer Women, an organization dedicated to educating and empowering women at midlife and beyond. And with me to help us think about the importance of doing our financial planning now rather than putting it off until some nebulous future time is Pamela J. Sams, BFA, CRPC, MBA, and trusted advisor to professional women. Pam is a chartered retirement planning counselor and NABBW's retirement planning associate. An expert in personal finance, Pam is president of Jackson Sams Wealth Strategies in Herndon, Virginia, and a treasured monthly guest who brings us important information related to money and financial planning. Welcome, everyone, to our February 2023 NABBW Financial Zoom call. We're glad you joined us for this important and informative hour. Now, before we can launch into tonight's discussion, I need to do a quick bit of housekeeping just to keep us legal. I'm going to play a quick audio clip.
Securities offered through Securities America Incorporated, a registered broker-dealer. Member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered through Securities America Advisors Incorporated, a SEC registered investment advisory firm. Pamela Sams, investment advisor representative. Jackson Sams Wealth Strategies, Securities America Incorporated, and all other entities named are separate entities.
All right. Thanks for joining us again, Pam.
Thanks for having me once again, Ann. And I was just listening to the intro that you did and all of the stats. And I work with a lot of women in transition with either going through a divorce or death of a spouse. So this topic is very dear to my heart because this is actually how I got into financial services, was really by helping my mother with that transition to becoming a widow when my dad passed away in 2001. So, during a transition like that, there's a lot of weighty financial decisions that women have to make, or another, or a spouse. It generally ends up being a woman, but for the most part, we're talking about women and men. But these are possibly decisions that are going to affect you for the rest of your life. So it's really important to really work with a professional if you can, especially during that time period, during that transition, because the emotions are so heavy. Making any financial decisions, having a third party is probably best to have, so you know exactly what you have, what you're gonna need to do, so you don't make any hasty decisions.
I can certainly understand that because I've been dealing in the last 4 months with my husband being ill and in the hospital, and I'm finding it's good that we have a lot of things like mortgages that are automatically paid, but I'm still now and then scrambling because I missed some payment because the payments automatically come to his computer, so they don't come in the mail. I don't know that they're supposed to be paid until I get some message from them that says, "You're about to be late, pay it today." And then I'm going, "Oh, okay." So, and
Yeah.
I'm not really grieving, so I can only imagine how
Yeah.
challenging it is when something is, much more emotionally fraught.
Hmm.
So I'm happy to get our discussion started here. As I've said, Pam, you have 10 points that you'd like to cover, and your first one is create a to-do list.
Yeah, so this is probably the easiest thing to do, is really trying to prioritize the decision making, because like I said, it's going to be a stressful time for most people. So really focusing in on addressing the most urgent financial matters in a checklist type of situation. So really creating the important financial necessities to consider when you do find yourself suddenly single, because like you said, even the most well outlaid plan, if all of a sudden something happens, like I said, the emotions take over. So at least if you put together a checklist prior, have it at the ready, available, but then also revisit it to make sure it's still relevant. And then revisit it on those financial date nights that I talked about. So if you find yourself suddenly single, at least you'll have a go-to, or at least a roadmap to
Mm-hmm.
follow in the event that there's a transition, either through a divorce or becoming widowed from your spouse. So kind of doing some pre-planning is what I encourage people to do, at least to have that to-do checklist at hand, so you can just
Mm-hmm.
go to or refer to as you start making those financial decisions, and really prioritizing that as you go along.
All right. The second thing on your list, uh, I think you briefly said something about it, but it's update accounts.
Yes. So as soon as your marital status changes from either the death or divorce of a spouse, you need to contact your banks, any brokerage firms or investment firms, and any other financial institutions where you have jointly held accounts, and make
Mm-hmm.
yourself the account holder, because they're going to need that. And then they're going to need, documentation. So for widows and widowers, they're going to need several copies of a spouse's death certificate in order to update accounts. So that's the first thing they're going to ask you when you update it. It's like, hey, my spouse passed away. Uh, the institution, the banks, the brokerage firms, and any other financial institutions are going to ask for a copy of death certificate. So when you do get that, make sure you do get several copies made of the death certificate in order to update any accounts. So divorcees will also need to provide signatures and then appropriate paperwork to financial institutions to change account ownerships, to make it a lot simpler. Recommended by divorce experts, attorneys, and also people like myself who work with a lot of divorce um, women and men, really to make sure you close any joint accounts and then open new ones in your own name,
Mhm.
because you want to make sure that all of your joint accounts are not active anymore. And then you also should follow up on accounts and may not be in your name to make sure that you include it as beneficiaries. So with the widows and widowers, make sure that they update accounts, that you have proper documentation, death certificate, and then also for divorcees, making sure you close all joint accounts, and then also close those, and then open up accounts in your name as well.
I failed to do that when I got divorced, and it got me into a terrible situation that it took me years
Hmm.
to fix.
Hmm.
Situation because the 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 bank that held the mortgage didn't know that I had no longer
Hmm.
owned any part of the house. I had an agreement with my ex-husband that he would take over ownership of the house, but it
Hmm.
was still on my credit. I think I've talked
Hmm.
about this in the
Yep.
past,
Hmm.
but because I had such a much smaller income at that time, and then this house payment, this mortgage that was sitting there, everybody I would try to talk to about, can I open an account? They would say,
Hmm.
no, I'm sorry. And
Mm.
I was too naive to understand that the reason, that I had to be saying, can I see my credit report? So if I would have looked at my credit report, I would
Mhm.
have understood right away. The problem being that that big house was there, sitting in my name still.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
very, very much what you're saying is I can
Yeah.
verify from personal experience. It can be very harmful if you don't take care of
If
that.
you don't take care of it, yeah, and especially if there's joint credit cards, like you said, also joint ownership and property, and especially unfortunately if you have an unsavory ex or something, things can go
Hmm.
awry if they're not paying things, and then that, of course, will affect your credit as well. So getting your name off of these things, opening up new accounts, or at least having some documentation that, a divorce decree or something like that, that you're no longer responsible for that, that does a world of difference when you're dealing with your
Hmm.
credit.
Okay, point number 3, check or collect retirement savings.
Yes, so retirement plans are really tricky when it comes to death and divorce. So really making sure you adhere to all of the rules and the tax laws that are rule those particular accounts. But retirement accounts such as 401ks, 403bs, and Roths, traditional as well, IRAs, will generally pass to the surviving spouse if that individual is named as the beneficiary. IRAs typically pass directly to surviving spouses, even if the beneficiary isn't named, just because of the marital status that you have. But the transfer of assets could be long and very expensive process if retirement accounts need to be settled in probate court. So if there's something outside of the traditional retirement accounts that you have. Now, a lot of times people aren't aware that even if you have a will or an estate plan, the retirement plans that you have through work, like 403, 401ks, 403bs, TSPs for government workers, they work on a different kind of set of rules, what they call the ERISA laws. And so any beneficiaries that are represented there supersede anything that are in the will. So there may not be the same thing. So if you have like your spouse or your ex-spouse on a beneficiary and you've changed it in, let's say, your estate plan, but you didn't change it at work,
Hmm.
whoever is named on the beneficiary at work gets the money. So you have to make sure that those coincide to make sure they are the same. It is definitely best to speak with a tax advisor or financial advisor to understand any of the tax implications of an inherited IRA before you move any assets, especially if a beneficiary is a what they call a non-spousal beneficiary. They've changed the rules a lot with Secure Act 2.0, or at least actually the Secure Act that originally came out, and then the Secure Act 2.0, which was just implemented in December of last year, has a whole set of rules on when IRAs are inherited by someone that is not a spouse. So if a widow is a widow and then their spouse passes away, and you name a beneficiary like your child or someone else, that becomes a non-spousal beneficiary, and then they have to adhere to certain rules. Um, don't want to get into it because there's a whole lot of tax rules involved, but know that it behaves differently than if a spouse inherited that particular asset. Also, typically divorcees have legal arrangements or part of the divorce settlement to acknowledge the receiver's right to receive a portion of the spouse's retirement account balance. So it's called what they call a quadro, which is a qualified retirement divorce order or divorce decree. And so that usually will be half or a portion of a spouse's retirement account balance. Not necessarily, because people have to work out kind of the divorce decree on their own. I have some clients that, in lieu of certain assets, they will forego having half of the retirement accounts. But that's definitely something you would have to consult with your divorce attorney and legal representation to see what's best in your best interest. But generally, that's typically in most states because of the divisibility of assets, that half of the spouse's retirement balance is one of the divorcee's receiving rights to get received. In court approved transactions, IRAs are also divided through a one-time distribution from one spouse's account to the other. So if the distribution of assets from that one, let's say, 100,000 in a 401k, one spouse gets the 50,000, other spouse keeps that, and then they open up a whole new IRA in that particular spouse's name for that. But that's usually, like I said, a court-approved transaction. It's called a quadro, QDRO, that would happen in the divisibility of retirement plan assets from that. But definitely consult your tax advisor because there are certain tax rules regarding that, and then also the uh, the assets that you would receive, making sure you work with the divorce attorney to see what is fair and equitable in a transaction like that.
Excellent. That's very good to know. Not something I was at all familiar with, so you got me well educated on that one now. Now, point number 4 on your list is life insurance policies.
Yes, so life insurance is very important, especially in the death of a spouse. So if a spouse had life insurance through an agent or through an employer, you as the surviving spouse should begin to receive those tax-free proceeds within usually 1 week to 6 weeks. Life insurance proceeds at the death of a spouse is received tax-free. So you don't have to pay taxes on any distributions from a life insurance policy. So usually within that first week, 1 week to 6 weeks after the death notification is received, again, the life insurance company is going to need a copy of the death certificate. So when a spouse passes away, make sure you get several copies because there's a variety of different firms that will need a copy to document that they're going to basically pay out the policy. So they're going to need a copy of the death certificate as well. Divorcees, people going through divorce should consider updating, of course, their beneficiary on their life insurance policies, as well as purchasing or changing coverage for themselves and their children as well. One of the things that divorcees may want to consider, especially if they're receiving alimony, or they don't try to call it alimony these days, they call it spousal maintenance. If you are receiving that, making sure that the significant other on the other side continues to carry life insurance, because in the event that they pass away, basically the spousal maintenance and or alimony goes away. So
Mhm.
you may make sure that there's coverage still under that ex-spouse, that either that's represented somewhere in the divorce decree, or you agree upon them keeping on a certain level of life insurance to continue to be able to provide the spousal maintenance in the event of a death, as well. But the key with the life insurance policies is life insurance is really making sure there's updated beneficiaries on the life insurance policies. If you go through a divorce, for widows or widowers, the surviving spouse, you will receive those tax-free benefits. And then it's usually within 1 to 6 weeks of that. If you do need proceeds from the life insurance policies to pay for any final expenses, definitely make sure that you have the documentation right away for the death certificate, so they can start paying out within, hopefully sooner than that 6 week period. But that's usually kind of the time frame. But if you need resources right away, sometimes funeral homes will work with you to for payment on it. They may request a deposit or something like that. But if you need resources right away for final expenses, try to get documentation to the life insurance company right away.
All right, excellent. Uh, you mentioned beneficiaries, but number 5 is a whole topic about beneficiaries.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. So you also want to update your own beneficiary. So as you update and review your policies and your accounts, you want to take the opportunity to ensure that your beneficiaries are also listed correctly, so you can protect your loved ones as well. So you don't want your ex-spouse on there, or if your spouse passed away and they were automatically listed as that, you want to also update your beneficiaries to maybe your children or someone else, that you want to have that. If you're going through divorce, you may want to remove, of course, your ex as a beneficiary, and then make sure you add or make adjustments to any beneficiary designations. Um, Usually, just giving a call or a form will do that with most institutions. Just say I need to change my beneficiaries, especially the ones through work. So, start
Mhm.
there first, to update your beneficiaries, then contact all of the other places that you have accounts that will require beneficiaries, or what they call transfer on death, which is most banks. So if you were joint on the account, like I said before, usually it's like I said, if it's a joint account and it has what they call a TOD, which is a transfer on death, making sure there's a different beneficiary on those accounts. So really just going through and updating and reviewing your own policies and accounts is where you want to focus in on.
All right. Point number 6 on your list is health insurance policies.
Yes. So if you receive health insurance through your spouse, and you may want to continue coverage by paying premiums through the COBRA laws. COBRA generally makes health insurance benefits available. It's generally costly though with COBRA. It could be up to 102% of the policy, typically up to about 35 months is where they have COBRA coverage for that. Again, you may want to consider insurance plans through your current employer, or an individual plan that may be a little bit more cost effective. Again, you can also, especially if you have children, put that in for divorcees or people going through divorce, may have the ex-spouse continue to cover at least the children on the health insurance, and outlining that in the divorce decree as an agreement that the children at least would be able to continue the health insurance if the if it was a family plan and the spouse was carrying both you and your children, at least through that, have them cover the children. You would probably have to shop around for an additional health insurance plan. Cobra, like I said, is going to be a little bit costly. That's kind of the go-to if all of a sudden, the kind of this suddenly single situation, and you have no other choice, then go into Cobra for the time period that you can, and then start shopping around for a health insurance policy on your own. Hopefully, if you have an employer, you can look at their plans. If not, then there's individual plans available for most people in their area, and or the healthcare exchange. You can take a look at that as well for your health insurance policies.
All right. Number 7 on your list, update your budget. I was
Yes.
surprised you waited till number 7 to talk about budget, Pam.
I know, but you knew it was going to be on the list.
Yeah, I do. Yes.
So after all of that, is really kind of focus in on is, creating that long-term financial plan, really addressing the most pressing matters to take the time to consider your long-term plans to really protect your financial well-being. And of course, the first area I always tell people about is your budget.
Mhm.
And so really creating an itemized list of your essential day-to-day expenses, your bills, groceries, mortgage, etc. And then list any outstanding debts that you have. And then after totaling your expenses and your essential expenses and your debt obligations, you'll have a clearer picture of really what you can spend on discretionary items such as entertainment, dining, eating out, travel, all of those things. Once you know your financial requirements are required to maintain your lifestyle, you can determine whether your income and your savings is going to cover those expenses. And if not, again, you want to consider ways to reduce or eliminate spending on anything that's in your budget. You can also consider saving money or downsizing your home if that makes sense, especially if you're going through a divorce or a death of a spouse. Your lifestyle is going to change tremendously. So you have to decide, are you going to continue living in the home that you're living in? Or are you going to continue kind of living the same lifestyle that you had before? Um, does it fit in the budget now that you're suddenly single and you now have one income versus two? So, the budget thing is going to be really, really huge. When I
Mhm.
help clients go through both being widow and divorce, that's kind of where I start is that, now that there's not an extra income in here, how are you building your lifestyle? Is that still feasible? Is your current lifestyle still feasible with one income? Or if you have proceeds from life insurance policies, or if you have kind of the retirement accounts, how is all that going to fit in with that? And especially for divorced women, that's a little bit of a challenge because they may not have had the resources available. I see a lot of times with maybe women not making as much as their male counterpart. How that
Mhm.
goes, making less. Um, is everything still going to fit in the budget? So I go through kind of what I call a pre-divorce budget and a post-divorce budget. There may be some things that are downsized and out of your budget, but there could be some things that you didn't think about. So doing a pre and post divorce budget, and the same thing with being a widow, kind of, pre and then post to see what the lifestyle and the financial requirements are to either number one, maintain your lifestyle or decide whether you need to make any reductions in your lifestyle, from there. Um, Really building that budget efficiently so you're not
Mhm.
overspending and you're not extending yourself too much, and you're bringing in the proper income, and then you have that debt obligations are being paid accordingly.
Well, that really makes sense. What you're saying about the pre and the post budget, and I only have one question about that, is that
Mhm.
sometimes you hear people say that after some calamitous experience in your life, such as a death of a spouse, or perhaps a
Mhm.
divorce, they say you shouldn't make any big changes for a year. But,
Mhm.
that would seem like putting these things off way too far into the future. So
Mhm.
is that something that you would disagree with, the concept of don't make any changes for at least a year? Is that not
I y-
doable?
it's 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 doable, but like I said, in the beginning is if you have help and you have guidance, because you don't want to
Hmm.
make that on your own. Because then working with either an advisor or somebody who knows kind of your situation a little bit better can guide you during that year where you're not really
Hmm.
making any hasty financial decisions. You're really kind of
Right.
consulting the professional to help you through that transition through that year, because you definitely shouldn't make any decisions within that year. You want to keep kind of status quo, but like I said, if you're working with someone who can be that objective third party to kind of
Hmm.
walk you through some of the pros and cons of the decisions you do need to make, then you can kind of ease into it a little bit more from that. The feasibility, like you said, of waiting for a year on your own, uh, is a lot can happen, with
Hmm.
building your budget and trying to maintain the same lifestyle if it's not feasible. So, that's where I really highly recommend at least consulting someone, at least to take you through that first year after your transition.
It would seem to me, since I started out by saying that the person that you work with, the person that you consult with, really needs to understand you and have your best interests at heart, that
Hmm.
I think what I'm hearing here is that we should get ourselves with financial advisors way before any of this starts to happen. It should be
Yeah,
something that
yeah.
that shouldn't be procrastinated about, getting some kind of financial advisor on your team.
Yeah, you should. I mean, that's the ideal, situation. But, I've taken on, clients in during this transition or a little bit before, where, they would definitely need the guidance to even, we hadn't worked together before, but during this period of transition, that's where they need a lot of kind of hand holding and guidance to make sure that the decisions that they make are not the emotional ones and that they're
Right.
financially sound. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, the next point on your list is Social Security benefits.
Yes. Social Security is tricky, regardless, even if you
Hmm.
are going through divorce and or being a widow. But if your spouse dies, you may be eligible for what they call a one-time death benefit from Social Security. Um, it changes, it varies, but it's nothing to write home about. Let's say that. The
Okay.
one-time death benefit, as well as 50% of your spouse's Social Security benefit, if it's higher, of course, than your own. So what
Hmm.
the Social Security Administration does, they take a look and see what they call the survivor benefit, survivor Social Security benefit would be, and then they also look at what your Social Security benefit would be on your own record, and then they reward you the higher of the two. So you don't have to make that decision. Benefits may be taken at your full retirement age, or you can elect to receive the reduced benefits a little bit earlier. Now, for divorced spouses, I run into this all the time because it's nowhere that anybody would have ever told you this unless you were working with a professional or had somebody go through it before. Divorced spouses could be eligible to receive Social Security benefits if they were married longer than 10 years and are at least 62 years old. They can receive a benefit on their spouse's record. So if their spouses have eligible for the Social Security benefits on their spouse's record is higher than yours, of course, then you get the higher of the two
Hmm.
again. But a lot of people, a lot of women or men going through divorce never realize they have that right to to the Social Security benefits. So you don't have to take your own if it's smaller. And let's say your spouse or your ex-spouse made a lot more money than you did. I ran into this recently, is that I had a stay-at-home mom. She was out of the workforce for quite a period of time, so she wasn't making a whole lot of money, but her ex-husband was. So that's something that we would take a look at. You know, she's not to 62 yet, but that's something we put in her financial plan, is that I'm sure his record would be a lot higher than yours because you had some time out of the workplace and you were a stay-at-home mom for some period of time. So that's something that, you know, she wasn't aware that she was able to get a higher Social Security benefit a little bit later on down the road and don't have to worry about, you know, the little bit of Social Security that she had on her own record as well. So those are some of the Social Security benefits. The survivor benefit, as being a widow, you get the one-time death benefit for Social Security, and then you also get the 50% of your spouse's Social Security benefit as well. So that's how, and then that can be implemented right away, or you can delay it if you decide to do that. And then they will reward you whichever was higher at the end of the decision that you decided to make a little bit later on. But those are your Social Security benefits for being a death of a spouse and then also being a divorced spouse.
All right. Again, good advice. Point number 9 on your list is estate plan.
Mm-hmm. So estate plan, you know, that's where we had talked about making sure you have a will and a trust and will and or trust in place, and also having a living will, or your healthcare directors, your power of attorney, all of those. So those definitely going to change if you have one in place. Those will change in the event of a death of a spouse and or going through divorce. So for widows or widowers, making sure that again, back to the beneficiaries, that you redo your estate plan. So now if your spouse was on there, you have to decide who's going to be now the executor of the account or the estate, so to speak. And then making sure that now you have to also who's going to be in charge of those decisions, health decisions, those healthcare directives. You know, do you want it to be, you know, brothers, sisters, children, good friend, whoever? Because automatically the spouse is kind of the default. But now, if your spouse is not there, who do you want to make those decisions? So back kind of to my mother's situation is that when my dad passed away, when her plan came into place, then my oldest sister was the executor. And then, you know, I was helping with some of the financial pieces of it. But those were kind of the outlined, making those adjustments and those changes to the estate plan when my dad passed away, who was going to kind of step up to make those decisions in the event that that the spouse is no longer there. So, and I have some clients that, you know, they don't want to put their children through that. So they have their sister or their brother making those decisions, or a really good friend. You know, I have another client who doesn't have any children. And so one of her good friends, you know, that she has put in that executor role as well. So redoing your estate plan is where you want to do both in the event that you have a spouse pass away, but also if you get divorced. So now your spouse is no longer there, you have to make the same things. Who's going to make those decisions in the event that you become disabled or you need to have those healthcare directives? Same thing with making any financial decisions if you become incapacitated. So the estate plan is huge when you're going through going through a divorce or becoming a widow. Making sure again all your beneficiaries are updated, and then designating the correct people that you want. Sometimes the person handling the money part is way different than the person handling the health part. Sometimes people don't want their, you know, the money part is not in their wheelhouse, but they're okay with making the health decisions, or vice versa. especially with children. It gets hard, especially like, I keep going back to my mother's situation, but in the event that something happened, there are certain siblings that would want, things to go on much longer than it should have. But,
Hmm.
there's somebody who needs to step up and say, okay, I think this is the point where we need to make a final decision versus that. And so you need to have the right people in the right roles when you do that.
Right.
And then have that conversation with them. Don't just put them on documents without letting them know. And then asking them,
Taking them by surprise.
yeah, it's taken by surprise, and ask them, are they capable of making those decisions? They may have very good intention, but when it comes down to making those hard decisions, letting, really getting their consent to say, are you going to be able to make this decision at the right time? So, kind of doing an interview, so to speak.
Hmm. Very good. It's my daughter, who's in her mid 40s, has purposely chosen not to have children, and I caught her saying something to me the other day about, I think the first sign of regret of this, because she was realizing that as she gets older, who's going to take care of her, kind of a thing. So,
Hmm.
I've always respected her right to make the decision that she didn't want children, and I was really sad to hear her say the other day that she's
Hmm.
realizing that there's a little piece missing from her future planning, because no children to
Hmm.
look to help her out.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. That's the challenge. I get that a lot.
right.
Working with mostly single women, either by choice or going through a
Hmm.
divorce or widow. Those are one of the things is, if, especially if they have no children,
Hmm.
and they start aging. Um, I had read a book a few years ago, kind of on this whole topic, kind of getting myself prepared for those hard questions as well for my clients. Is one in the book, I can't remember the name of it now, but it was basically, I think it was Suddenly Single. That's why I said I've been doing this presentation for a
Okay.
while. Talked about, childless, um, people who with no children, what are they doing? And one story in the book was, she was in a, fairly good community, and she had befriended kind of a neighbor who was kind
Hmm.
of a daughter-like person,
Hmm.
and then she asked that person to step in those times where she needed kind of assistance, but also making those decisions. So if you do have, kind of people like that, not necessarily family, but
Hmm.
you've gotten to a point where, they are kind of like family, then
Hmm.
that could be an option as well. Looking at his history, you kind of look at things on, people were put into these, homes, and then some people come to visit. And I mean, that's going to be one of the things that in this country we do have to consider,
Hmm.
especially, you had mentioned, most widows, not widowers usually marry.
Hmm.
Statistically, they usually remarry within the first 3 years of their spouse passing away. But widows don't really remarry, and so
Hmm.
like you said, there can be 2 decades of you not having someone there, and then, in a declining state if you have no children. And boomers are we getting older and older, what is going to happen with, let's say, these widows who have no children, and,
Hmm.
what's society, uh, what is society going to do about it? That's one of the things that really kind of concerns me too, as of an advisor, is seeing kind of the long-term care, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But the needs for long-term care as the boomers start aging, but then those who have no one there to go through the process with them, you
Hmm.
know, what needs to be done. And it's just me on my soapbox right now, but
Well,
that's
that's all
one of the
right.
things, is that we need as a society, what needs to happen in the event that we have a mass amount of people going through, um, a long-term care situation, or elderly population with
Hmm.
no family.
Well, that was actually part of the reason that I got interested in um, studying gerontology back when I
Hmm.
was in college. It wasn't something that I started studying until my senior year in college because I heard a professor who was talking about that pig in the python thing that we baby boomers are, and
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
were talking about um, the end of baby boomers' lives, and um, that it would that we've changed society ever since they had to build more schools because there were so
Hmm.
many of us going to school. But as
Hmm.
we go through each of the transitions of life, even to the transition of being old and preparing to die,
Hmm.
changes have to be made in our society as a result of the size of our group.
Hmm.
So you may call it a soapbox, but it's an important topic that we need to realize is out there.
Hmm.
You know, it's it's waiting for us, and society, and including probably organizations and the government, are going to have to make some decisions about how that's going to be handled.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things that probably sooner rather than later. I know a lot of
Right.
times people kind of kick the can down the road, but
Mhm.
I think at some
Right.
point, it's gonna stare us right in the face that we do have to,
Mhm.
make that decision on what's gonna happen.
Right.
Like you said, definitely the transition of a large group like boomers going through society systematically and now,
Mhm.
aging and people living a lot longer um, based on, medical advances and those sort of things. It can be quite a I wouldn't say burden, but it'll be quite a lot to deal
Mhm.
with as a
Mhm.
society.
Right. All right. Well, if you're done with talking about estate plan, I'm not quite sure if I
Mhm.
interrupted you.
Oh, no, no,
Then the
no.
10th point on your list is protect yourself for the future.
Yeah, so this is what I was just gonna talk about was the long-term care.
Mhm.
So really considering long-term care insurance to defray some of the costs of a nursing home stay or at-home assisted living facility can drain your income. So especially now if you're divorced and or a widow, that's even more of a concern. If you are employed, disability insurance can help provide some income. If you become injured, of course, or ill, that's going to cover that. But the long-term care piece is huge. Despite the emotional strains that you could experience due to death or divorce or death of a spouse, make sure you take the steps to ensure that your financial well-being as a newly single person is really intact. So your changing finances match your new legally single um, status can be complicated, and it's really important to
Mhm.
take all the necessary steps to ensure that you have everything in proper order. But the long-term care insurance really kind of protecting your future is really key. So recently I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and one of the topics was kind of this aging thing. Again, it was the MIT Age Lab had some really good stats on yeah, how many centenarians we were going to have within the next 5 to 10 years, and
Mhm.
the number was quite big.
Okay.
People living over their hundreds, and then again, who is going to take care and the cost of long-term care insurance. So a lot of the states, I'm not sure if you're familiar with kind of it's a Washington State, and I believe California is looking at it as well. Mandatory long-term care insurance, employees paying a what they call a payroll tax to ensure that they have long-term care insurance. So the state of Washington has implemented that last year or a year before that. Some other states, California is looking at it, New York is looking at it. Because what's going to happen is that states are going to start to see that long-term care is going to become an issue. And if people can't afford it, Medicaid is going to be the next option. And Medicaid is run by most states. So states don't want
Mhm.
that on their
Right.
their books at some point. So they're going to
Mhm.
try to make sure people have the proper coverage through long-term care insurance. So a lot of the carriers were overrun by people running to get policies right away over the
Okay.
last couple of years. But those are at least three states that we know of. But yeah, I've kind of been reading up on it as well. So I think about 10 different states are kind of looking at something similar, where there's a mandatory payroll tax to pay for healthcare and long-term care insurance. So definitely be on the lookout for that. But that's kind of how um, they're going to defray some of the burden on the states in terms
Hmm.
of Medicaid, because long-term we've had this discussion before. Long-term care, assisted living, nursing home care is a lot to deal with.
It is. Right.
And so for the average person, and then I've shared with you before, my mother was on Medicaid, for several years when she was in assisted living facility, and then eventually to hospice, but still Medicaid related. Um, Imagine, a large group, like I said, the boomers going through and needing assistance through a Medicaid system versus having long-term care insurance. So the states are starting to kind of look at it as, wow, this is going to be a big tidal wave. We need to figure out how to do this. So some of the mandatory long-term care insurance having been paid through payroll tax through employers is one of the things that states have been kind of gnawing on for a little bit.
Well, I find that fascinating because I'm not sure that you and I have discussed this, but about 4 months ago, my husband had a severe injury. He started out uh, at our local hospital, um, where the fact that he is over 65 means that his Medicare was covering him. But
Hmm.
then he'd get to a point at the hospital where if you're not making recovery, you can't stay at the hospital.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
he spent about 8 weeks at a nursing home. Now, I was
Hmm.
told that the nursing home we had him in was the nicest one in the tri-state area. I
Hmm.
don't know because it's the only one I went to, but I can tell you that the first question they asked us when we walked in the door is, "Do you have long-term care insurance?"
Hmm.
And we discovered that uh, his Medicare did not cover the nursing home coverage.
Hmm.
And we did not have long term care insurance. You know, you've been telling me to get it for all these
Hmm.
years. It went through a time when it was hard to buy. And
Yes.
so I kind of put it off because there was hardly any insurers that were offering it anymore.
Hmm.
And so I kind of let it slide. And it was a hard realization to figure out that the all the weeks that he spent at the nursing home, which was important time for his
Hmm.
recovery, um, but that dollars was coming straight out of us for
Hmm.
all of that, and so what you're telling me, I'm not dealing with a death or a divorce, but a temporary loss of a spouse
Hmm.
because he was unable to be working
Yes.
and needed to have care.
Hmm.
It was quite an expensive undertaking, and I'm happy to say that he'll be coming home tomorrow. So
Oh,
it's
awesome.
been
That's
like
great.
about 4 months that he's been recovering,
Hmm.
and he'll still have PT and those sorts of
Oh
things
yeah.
ahead of him, but at least he won't be out of the house anymore. So
Hmm.
so
Well, that's great. That's
that's
that's good.
that's
Definitely good news to hear.
right,
Yeah,
right. But
exactly.
I have
Yeah.
learned the hard way that what you're saying here about protecting ourselves for the future
Yeah.
is a critical point.
It is, and I get it. I get the thing all the time is, hey Pam, how can I deal with my day to day and then really kind of protect my future and think about that. I'm just trying to make sure, I keep the lights on and,
Mhm.
the household running. Your future is just as important, but I get it, using kind of today's dollars and doing that where you have to, put money on current expenses. But really working with hopefully professional that can show you, maybe it doesn't have to be a either or. It can be an
Mhm.
and in there.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Well, anything more that you have to say about protecting for the future?
Nope, just making sure that it's, especially being suddenly single,
Mhm.
that you have the resources, of course, as you start aging, making sure you have the proper resources, but then also having people that you can name that'll help take care of you as you start aging as well, and making some appropriate plans for the future.
Right. All right. Well, I don't have a question from a listener, but I do have one point that I wanted to cover
Hmm.
before we start to wrap things up here. And that is that in doing my research to get ready for our call today, I ran into just this morning a kind of a doom and gloom sort of a headline on CNBC, which mentioned that on average, retirees lost 23% of their 401k savings in 2022.
Hmm.
Briefly, the article explained that although the average 401k balance rose during the fourth quarter, year-end balances were down 23% from 2021. They said it was $103,900, according to a report by Fidelity Investments, which apparently is the nation's largest provider of 401k
Hmm.
plans.
Yeah.
And the article also reported that the average IRA balance plunged 20% year over year to 104,000 during the same time period. Now, of course, you and I and everybody listening to this knows that 2022 was a year marked by some stiff economic headwinds, and I
Hmm.
also know as a former journalist that this sort of doom and gloom headline draws readers.
Hmm.
Um, but I wanted to be sure and mention it to you, Pam, on this call to give you the opportunity to advise us, because I think you're going to tell me that the important thing is to stay the course. But
Hmm.
what is it that you would have to say about what Fidelity is reporting here?
Yeah, yeah, and of course, my philosophy is always to, stay the course on that. But this is a good time for people to review, where they stand. Especially the best part of 2022 is that it's over. That's
Yes,
kind of the
I
best
can
part
totally agree.
of it. It was definitely painstaking for a lot of reasons. But this is kind of the don't be the ostrich again.
Hmm.
Especially that's what happens a lot of times where we don't want to open our statements and we don't want to look at it. Especially having a challenging year. This is a good time to really review, see if there needs to be any adjustments that need to be made, especially if you may have been taking on a little bit more risk than you thought you were in your
Hmm.
portfolio, to make some adjustments to it. But definitely, stay in the course. And if you're closer to retirement, this would definitely be a good time to consult a professional to run an analysis and see, what damage happened in 2022. Are you still on track for your retirement? If not, what type of things you need to do to get back on track?
All right. Well, thank you, Pam. As usual, it's been
Mhm.
a great discussion with you. I appreciate you providing us with this excellent suddenly single checklist to help us wrap up February, which, of course, you are always telling us in other Februarys that February is the month of love. So
Mhm.
um, this is a loving thing for us to do for ourselves. And so I look forward to our next discussion, which, barring any unscheduled challenges that you and I might have between now and then, will probably be the usual fourth Thursday, which is
Mhm.
March 23rd, at the
Mhm.
same time and location. And let's see if there's anything else um, that I need to talk about here. No, I guess I only ask
Mhm.
if there's anything more that you would like to share.
Nope, I think I covered everything. But like you said, this is the month of love, and
Hmm.
so all this month I've been really talking about. It's a campaign called Insure Your Love, so it talks all about life insurance and making sure you have the proper life insurance protection for your family. So this, like you said, is definitely a good time to love on yourself. Being
Hmm.
suddenly single, to
Right.
again ensure that you have all of the necessary resources in your arsenal to continue to protect your future.
Excellent. Well, to our listening audience, I want to thank you as well for joining us for this informative call with Pam Sams. If you have any questions later, Of course, feel free, as I always say at the end of these calls, to email Pam at pamela@jacksonsams.com. That's JACKSONSAMS.com. Or go to her website at jacksonsams.com. You can see the background behind her where she's got the swan that stands for sleep well at night. Is that
Yep, you got it.
okay? All right. And if you'd like to know more about the National Association of Baby Boomer Women, check out our website at nabbw.com, our forum at boomerwomenspeak.com, and our Facebook page at facebook.com/nabbw. So thank you again, Pam, and thank you, audience, for joining us tonight. And I appreciate all of you.
Great. Good evening. Have a good night.
Good night.